My parents kicked me out on my 28th birthday for not giving my sister $750,000, so I froze their credit cards and watched their life fall apart. What they didn't know was that I had been secretly managing their finances for 3 years, and I held all the power they thought they had taken from me. By the time I was done, they learned exactly what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'm glad to share this story with you. Follow my journey until the end, and comment what state you're watching from so I can see how far this story has reached across the country. The birthday cake was still sitting on the kitchen counter, untouched, when my mother Vivian delivered the ultimatum that would change everything. I was standing in the living room of my childhood home in Riverside Heights, still wearing the blue dress I'd picked out specially for what I thought would be a celebration. Instead, I was about to face the most devastating betrayal of my life. "Natalie, darling, we need to talk," my mother said, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she wanted something. At 58, Vivian Hartwell had perfected the art of manipulation disguised as maternal concern. Her perfectly styled auburn hair and designer blouse made her look like she belonged in a luxury magazine, rather than delivering life-altering news to her daughter on her birthday. My father Richard stood behind her, his arms crossed over his expensive polo shirt. At 62, he'd inherited his family's construction business and had always prided himself on being a, quote, self-made man, conveniently forgetting the trust fund that had launched his career. His gray eyes, usually warm when he looked at me, were cold and distant. "What's going on?" I asked, though something in my stomach was already twisting with dread. My younger sister, Celeste, was conspicuously absent from the room, and in our family, that usually meant trouble. "It's about your sister," Vivian began, settling into the leather armchair that cost more than most people's monthly salary. "She's in a bit of a situation, and we need your help." A situation. That was Vivian's way of describing the endless series of disasters that followed Celeste wherever she went. At 25, my sister had already burned through 2 trust funds, crashed 3 luxury cars, and dropped out of 4 different colleges. She had a talent for finding wealthy men to fund her lifestyle, and an even greater talent for destroying those relationships spectacularly. "What kind of situation?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Richard stepped forward, his businessman persona sliding into place. "Celeste has found an incredible investment opportunity, a tech startup that's about to go public. The potential returns are enormous, but she needs capital to secure her position." I felt my heart sink. "How much capital?" $750,000, Vivian said, as casually as if she were discussing the weather. The number hit me like a physical blow. I stared at my parents, waiting for them to laugh, to tell me this was some kind of elaborate birthday joke. But their faces remained serious, expectant. "You're joking," I said finally. "You can't be serious." "We're completely serious," Richard said. "Natalie, you have the money sitting in your trust fund, barely earning any interest. This is a chance for all of us to benefit." My trust fund. The money my grandmother Delilah had left me when she died 5 years ago. My grandmother, who had worked as a seamstress for 60 years to build her small fortune, who had lived modestly and saved every penny so her granddaughter could have opportunities she never had. The woman who had believed in me when no one else did. "That money isn't for investments," I said, my voice shaking. "It's for my future, for my business, for family," Vivian interrupted sharply. "Family comes first, Natalie, always." I looked around the room that had once felt like home but now felt like a trap. The expensive furniture, the original artwork, the Persian rugs, all of it bought with money from Dad's business, money that had been flowing freely for years. Why did they need mine? "Where's Celeste?" I asked. "Shouldn't she be here asking for this herself?" My parents exchanged a look that I couldn't quite read. "She's with her boyfriend Jameson in the Hamptons," Vivian said. She'll be back next week to finalize the paperwork. Of course she was. While I was working 16-hour days building my graphic design business from my tiny apartment in downtown Millbrook, Celeste was sipping champagne in a beach house that probably cost more per night than I made in a month. "I need time to think about this," I said. "There is no time," Richard said, his voice taking on that commanding tone he used in business meetings. "The investment window closes Monday. We need your answer now." "Now?" I stared at them in disbelief. "It's my birthday." "You're asking me to hand over $750,000 on my birthday without even letting me think about it?" "We're asking you to help your sister," Vivian said, standing up and moving closer to me. "The sister who has always looked up to you, who needs you now more than ever." The irony wasn't lost on me. Celeste, who had never worked a day in her life, who had mocked my little business at every family gathering, who had told me just last Christmas that I was wasting my potential by not marrying someone wealthy like she planned to do. "And if I say no?" I asked quietly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My parents looked at each other again, and I saw something pass between them that made my blood run cold. "Then you'll need to find somewhere else to live," Richard said finally. "We can't have that kind of selfishness in this house." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Selfishness? You're calling me selfish for not wanting to give away my inheritance?" "We're calling you selfish for not helping family when they need it," Vivian said, her voice like ice, "for choosing money over blood." I looked at my parents, really looked at them, and saw strangers. The people who had raised me, who had taught me about right and wrong, who had told me 1,000 times that I was their precious daughter, were now willing to throw me out on the street for refusing to fund my sister's latest scheme. "I won't do it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I won't give Celeste that money." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Richard walked to the front door and opened it. "Then you have 1 hour to pack your things and get out of my house," he said without looking at me. As I stood there in my birthday dress, staring at my parents who had just disowned me for refusing to enable my sister's reckless lifestyle, I made a decision that would change all of our lives forever. What they didn't know was that for the past 3 years, I hadn't just been running my design business. I'd also been secretly managing their financial accounts, paying their bills, and handling their investments. They had handed over control to me when Richard had his heart attack and couldn't focus on the details. And I had never given that control back. They thought they held all the power. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Standing in my childhood bedroom with a suitcase half packed, I felt the full weight of my parents' betrayal crushing down on me. The room that had been my sanctuary for 28 years now felt foreign and hostile. My hands shook as I folded clothes, trying to process what had just happened. 20 minutes had passed since Richard opened the front door like I was some unwelcome stranger. Through my bedroom window, I could see him pacing in the backyard, phone pressed to his ear, probably calling Celeste to share the good news that they'd successfully bullied me into submission. Except they hadn't. Vivian appeared in my doorway, her face a mask of cold disappointment. "I hope you're reconsidering this foolish decision," she said, watching me pack. "There's still time to do the right thing." I stopped folding and looked at her directly. "The right thing? You mean bankrupting myself to fund Celeste's latest fantasy?" "I mean supporting your family when they need you," she replied, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Your grandmother would be ashamed of how selfish you've become." The mention of Grandma Delilah hit like a physical blow. My grandmother, who had worked her fingers to the bone so I could have opportunities, who had specifically told me in her final weeks that the money was for my dreams, not anyone else's. "Don't you dare bring Grandma into this," I said, my voice low and dangerous. She left that money to me, not to Celeste's shopping addiction disguised as a business investment. Vivian's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. "Your sister has vision, Natalie. She's going places. All you do is sit in that tiny apartment making pretty pictures on computers." "Those pretty pictures pay my bills without asking my parents for handouts," I shot back. For now, Vivian said coldly. But what happens when your little hobby stops being profitable? Where will you go? Who will take care of you? She paused, letting the threat hang in the air. We're offering you a chance to be part of something bigger, to help secure all of our futures. I zipped up my suitcase with more force than necessary. By giving away money that isn't yours to claim? By being a team player instead of a selfish brat who thinks she's better than her family? That's when it hit me, the real reason behind this ultimatum. It wasn't just about the money. It was about control. About keeping me dependent, keeping me small, keeping me grateful for whatever scraps of affection they threw my way. For years, I'd been the responsible one. The one who cleaned up Celeste's messes, who handled the family's financial paperwork when Dad was recovering from his heart attack, who managed their investments and made sure their bills were paid on time. I'd done it all gladly, thinking I was helping my family. But I wasn't family to them. I was an employee. A useful tool they could manipulate and discard when I stopped being convenient. 30 minutes, Richard called from downstairs. His voice echoed through the house like a countdown to execution. I grabbed my laptop bag and threw in my external hard drives containing all my work files. At least they couldn't take away my business. My phone buzzed with a text message from my best friend Luna. "Happy birthday! Can't wait to celebrate later. Party popper!" I stared at the message, realizing I'd have to explain why I was suddenly homeless. The humiliation burned in my chest. How do you tell people that your own parents threw you out for refusing to fund your sister's lifestyle? Another text came through, this one from an unknown number. "Hey sis, Mom told me about the amazing news. Can't wait to celebrate when I get back from the Hamptons. You're the best. 2 hearts C. Celeste. Already counting money that wasn't hers, already planning how to spend my inheritance." The casual entitlement in her message made my blood boil. I walked to my dresser and opened the bottom drawer, pulling out a manila folder I'd hidden beneath old sweaters. Inside were documents I'd been meaning to organize for months. Financial statements, investment portfolios, banking information. All the paperwork from when I'd taken over managing my parents' affairs. As I flipped through the papers, a cold realization settled over me. My father's business account routing numbers, my mother's credit card information, investment passwords they'd asked me to handle. Online banking access they'd never bothered to change. They'd been so focused on controlling me that they'd forgotten who actually controlled their money. I pulled out my laptop and opened my secure password manager. Account after account appeared on the screen. Utilities, credit cards, investment portfolios, the business accounts for Hartwell Construction. Everything my parents thought they owned was accessible through passwords and security questions only I knew the answers to. A dangerous idea began forming in my mind. 20 minutes! Richard shouted. I looked around my childhood room one last time. The awards from high school, the art supplies that had started my career, the photos of family vacations where we all looked happy. It was all a lie. The loving family, the supportive parents, the bond I thought we shared, none of it had been real. They wanted to play hardball? They wanted to use financial pressure to force me into submission? 2 could play that game. I opened my phone and started typing a response to Celeste's text. "Actually, there's been a change of plans. You might want to come home early." But I didn't send it. Not yet. Instead, I opened my laptop and began accessing accounts. First, I changed all the passwords to systems only I had been managing. Then I started making calls to credit card companies, claiming suspicious activity on accounts I was listed as an authorized user on. "Yes, I'd like to freeze this account temporarily," I said to the first customer service representative. "I'm concerned about potential fraud." By the time I finished my calls, I had frozen or flagged every major account my parents relied on for their daily expenses. Their credit cards, their business line of credit, even their mortgage auto-pay system. Everything would be locked down for security review within 24 hours. 10 minutes! Richard's voice was getting angrier. I closed my laptop and picked up my bags. As I walked downstairs, I saw my parents waiting by the front door like guards ensuring a prisoner's departure. They both looked so smug, so certain they'd won. "I hope you change your mind," Vivian said as I reached the bottom step. "Pride is a terrible thing to waste a family over." I paused at the door and looked back at them one last time. "You're right about pride," I said quietly. "But this isn't about pride. It's about respect. And you've just shown me exactly how much you respect me." Richard opened the door wider. "The world is going to teach you some hard lessons, Natalie. Don't say we didn't warn you." As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, carrying everything I owned in 2 suitcases and a laptop bag, I turned back to face my parents one final time. "You know what, Dad? You're absolutely right. Someone is about to learn some very hard lessons." I walked away from the house where I'd spent my entire life, where I'd believed I was loved and valued and protected. Behind me, I could hear the door slam with finality. What my parents didn't realize was that they'd just declared war on the one person who knew exactly where all their financial vulnerabilities were hidden. And I had every intention of winning. The Sunset Motel on Highway 47 wasn't exactly where I'd planned to spend my 28th birthday night, but it was the only place I could afford on short notice. The neon sign flickered erratically, casting pink and blue shadows across the cracked parking lot as I hauled my suitcases from my car. Room 237 smelled like stale cigarettes and industrial disinfectant, but it was mine for the next week while I figured out my next move. I sat on the scratchy comforter and stared at my phone, which had been buzzing nonstop since I'd left Riverside Heights 3 hours ago. 17 missed calls from Vivian, 12 from Richard, and surprisingly, 3 from Celeste. Apparently my parents had broken the news of my selfishness to her while she was still supposedly enjoying her Hamptons getaway. The most recent voicemail was from my father, and his tone had shifted from angry to panicked. "Natalie, honey, there seems to be some kind of problem with our accounts. Call me back immediately. This is urgent." I smiled grimly and deleted the message without listening to the others. The account freezes were already taking effect. Faster than I'd expected, actually. My laptop sat open on the small table, multiple banking websites displayed across different browser tabs. The Hartwell Construction business account showed a hold on all transactions pending security verification. Vivian's Platinum credit card was temporarily suspended for unusual activity patterns. Even their mortgage company had flagged their account after I'd reported concerns about potential identity theft. It was amazing how easy it was to create chaos when you had all the right information. Social security numbers, mother's maiden names, anniversary dates, first pet names. I'd grown up with all the answers to their security questions. And since I'd been managing their finances for 3 years, every bank and credit card company had records of me as an authorized contact. My phone rang again. This time it was Luna. "Birthday girl, please tell me you're getting ready for dinner. I made reservations at that new Italian place downtown, and I've been looking forward to this all week." I'd completely forgotten about our dinner plans. The idea of pretending everything was normal, of celebrating while my life had just imploded, seemed impossible. "Luna, I need to cancel," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "Something's happened." "What kind of something? You sound awful." "My parents kicked me out. I'm staying at the Sunset Motel." Silence. Then, "I'm sorry, what? Did you just say your parents kicked you out? On your birthday?" I gave her the condensed version, the $750,000 demand, the ultimatum, the door being literally opened for my exit. With each detail, Luna's responses grew increasingly outraged. "Those absolute monsters," she said when I finished. "Natalie, you're coming to stay with me. Right now, pack your stuff and drive to my apartment. I can't impose on you like that. You can and you will. Besides," Luna's voice took on a mischievous tone, "I'm dying to hear about whatever revenge plot you're obviously cooking up. I know that tone in your voice." She knew me too well. "What makes you think I'm planning revenge?" "Because you're your grandmother's granddaughter, and Delilah Morrison didn't raise any pushovers." Also, you have that scary calm thing going on that you get when you're about to destroy someone's life. An hour later, I was sitting in Luna's cozy apartment in downtown Millbrook, surrounded by her collection of vintage movie posters and plants that somehow thrived, despite her claiming to have a black thumb. She'd ordered Chinese takeout and opened a bottle of wine, insisting we turn my disaster of a birthday into what she called a quote, strategic planning session. Okay, walk me through exactly what kind of access you have to their accounts, Luna said, settling cross-legged on her couch with a notepad like she was preparing for a business meeting. I pulled up my password manager and showed her the extensive list. Pretty much everything. When Dad had his heart attack, they were so overwhelmed with medical bills and business decisions that they asked me to handle all the administrative stuff. I've been paying their bills, managing their investments, even handling payroll for his construction company. Luna's eyes widened. And they never took any of that access away? They were so relieved to have someone else deal with the boring money stuff that they just forgot about it. Dad would rather be on a job site than reviewing bank statements, and Mom prefers shopping to budgeting. So what you're telling me, Luna said slowly, is that you have complete control over the financial lives of two people who just made you homeless for refusing to give away your inheritance. That's exactly what I'm telling you. She grinned wickedly. Oh, this is going to be good. What's the plan? I'd been thinking about this since I'd left the motel. The account freezes were just the beginning, a warning shot to get their attention. But I wanted them to understand what it felt like to be powerless, to have someone else control their fate. Phase 1 is already in motion, I said, showing her the frozen accounts on my laptop. Emergency security holds that will take 72 hours minimum to resolve. Long enough to ruin their weekend and make them sweat. Phase 2? I start making some strategic changes to their automatic payments. Nothing illegal, just redirecting their cash flow in ways that might teach them some valuable lessons about financial responsibility. Luna leaned forward, intrigued. What kind of redirections? I opened a new browser tab and navigated to the Hartwell construction payroll system. Dad's employees get paid every Friday. This Friday, instead of their paychecks going to their usual accounts, the money is going to be donated to various charities. The Children's Hospital Foundation, the Homeless Shelter of Greater Millbrook, the Women's Crisis Center, places that actually help people instead of enabling spoiled brats. Can you do that legally? I'm an authorized user on all these accounts. As far as the banks know, these are legitimate transfers requested by account holders. And technically, I'm not stealing anything. The money is going to registered charities that will provide proper donation receipts for tax purposes. Luna whistled low. Your parents are going to lose their minds. That's the idea. But here's the beautiful part. When they try to reverse the donations, they'll have to explain to the charities why they want to take money away from sick children and homeless families. The PR nightmare alone will be worth it. My phone buzzed with another call from Richard. I let it go to voicemail, then played it on speaker for Luna to hear. Natalie, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this needs to stop immediately. Our credit cards aren't working, the bank is asking for additional verification on everything, and your mother is having a panic attack because she can't access her shopping accounts. This is ridiculous over a simple family disagreement. Call me back now. Luna snorted. A simple family disagreement? Is that what we're calling financial extortion and emotional abuse now? I was already pulling up more accounts on my laptop. Oh, we're just getting started. Wait until he sees what happens to his country club membership, his luxury car payments, and his premium cable package. You're going to cancel all of that? I'm going to redirect all of that. Richard's monthly country club dues? Going to the local food bank. Vivian's spa membership fees? Being donated to a scholarship fund for underprivileged students. Every single luxury expense they take for granted is going to help people who actually need it. Luna raised her wine glass in a toast. To your grandmother, who clearly taught you well. As we clinked glasses, my phone rang again. This time it was Celeste, calling from her supposedly relaxing vacation. "I think I'll take this one," I said, answering with false sweetness. "Hi, Celeste. How are the Hamptons?" "What the hell is going on?" My sister's voice was shrill with panic. "Mom and Dad called me crying about some kind of financial emergency. They said you're being vindictive and childish, but their credit cards aren't working and they can't access their accounts." "Gosh, that sounds really stressful for them," I said, winking at Luna. "Financial insecurity is so scary, isn't it? Not knowing where your next meal is coming from or if you'll have a roof over your head." "This isn't funny, Natalie. They need that money for my investment opportunity. The window is closing, and if I miss this chance..." "Then you'll have to find another way to fund your fantasies," I interrupted. "Maybe try getting a job. I hear they're character building." Celeste was quiet for a moment, then her voice turned cold and calculating. "You're going to regret this. Mom and Dad won't forget how you abandoned the family when we needed you most." "Funny thing about abandonment, Celeste, it works both ways." I hung up and looked at Luna, who was staring at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Are you sure you want to go down this road?" she asked gently. "Because once you cross certain lines, there's no going back." I thought about my parents' faces when they'd opened the door and told me to leave. The casual cruelty in their voices, the way they dismissed 28 years of love and loyalty like it, meant nothing. The way they'd been willing to sacrifice my future for Celeste's whims without a second thought. "They crossed the line first," I said, turning back to my laptop. "I'm just making sure they understand the consequences." Phase 3 was going to be the most satisfying yet. Tomorrow morning, I was going to start the process of transferring their emergency fund, the $200,000 they kept in a high-yield savings account, into a trust fund for foster children aging out of the system. Money that was supposed to protect them from financial disasters was going to protect kids who had no family at all. By the time I was finished, my parents were going to learn exactly what it felt like to be powerless, vulnerable, and at someone else's mercy. Just like they'd made me feel on my birthday. The next morning arrived with the sound of my phone vibrating like an angry wasp against Luna's coffee table. I'd fallen asleep on her couch with my laptop still open, surrounded by empty Chinese takeout containers and printed bank statements. Through her apartment windows, I could see the early morning light casting long shadows across downtown Millbrook as the city slowly came to life. 23 missed calls, 47 text messages, and one email marked urgent family emergency from my father's business account. Luna emerged from her bedroom in an oversized sweater and mismatched socks, took one look at my phone, and whistled low. "Looks like someone's morning just got very interesting." The most recent voicemail was from Vivian, and her usual composed tone had completely cracked. "Natalie Marie Morrison, I don't know what you think you're accomplishing, but you need to fix this immediately. We can't buy groceries, we can't pay for gas. Your father's workers are calling because their paychecks bounced, and the bank is treating us like criminals. This has gone far enough." I played the message on speaker while brewing coffee, noting how she'd used my full name, including my grandmother's maiden name, like some kind of maternal authority that no longer held any power over me. "Bounced paychecks?" Luna asked, settling beside me with her own mug. "I thought you said you were redirecting the payroll to charities." "I was, but apparently the construction company's main account didn't have enough funds to cover both the charitable donations I authorized yesterday and the regular payroll." I pulled up the business banking website and checked the account balance. Looks like Dad's been running closer to the edge than he likes to admit. The Hartwell construction account showed a balance of $1,247.83. For a business that usually maintained a six-figure operating balance, this was catastrophic. My redirected donations had cleared overnight $45,000 to various charities, which should have been covered by the account's usual balance. The fact that it wasn't suggested my father had been hiding some serious financial problems. "Wait," I said, digging deeper into the account history. "Luna, look at this." I pulled up 3 months of bank statements and highlighted a series of large transfers. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork, Richard had been moving money from the business account to a personal investment account. Not small amounts, $25,000 to $40,000 per transfer. He's been siphoning money from his own company, Luna said, reading over my shoulder. Why would he do that? I clicked through more statements, finding the pattern going back almost 8 months. Because he's gambling. Look at these investment account withdrawals. They're all going to the same place. The destination account belonged to Atlantic Shore Casino Resort. Richard had been systematically draining his business to fund gambling losses, leaving just enough in the operating account to cover immediate expenses. No wonder they were so desperate for my $750,000. My phone rang, interrupting my discovery. This time it was a number I didn't recognize with a local area code. Miss Morrison? This is Jake Castellanos. I'm the foreman for Hartwell Construction. I'm trying to reach your father, but his phone keeps going to voicemail. My crew hasn't been paid, and some of the guys are threatening to walk off the job site. Do you know what's going on? My heart sank. Jake had been with my father's company for 15 years, a loyal employee who'd brought my family Christmas cookies every year since I was a teenager. He had 3 kids and a mortgage, and my revenge plot had just made his life significantly more complicated. Jake, I'm so sorry. There's been a mix-up with the bank accounts. Can you give me the details on what happened with payroll? The checks we got yesterday all bounced. The bank said insufficient funds, but that's never happened before. Mr. Hartwell always takes care of his people, you know? I'm worried something's seriously wrong. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of unintended consequences. How many employees are we talking about? 12 guys, plus me. That's about $30,000 in paychecks that didn't clear. $30,000 that hardworking people were counting on for rent, groceries, and their own family's needs. People who had nothing to do with my parents' betrayal or Celeste's entitled demands. Jake, I'm gonna fix this today. Can you tell the crew that emergency payroll will be processed by this afternoon? You can do that? I mean, I don't want to overstep, but your dad's been unreachable since yesterday. I have access to the business accounts. The money will be there. After I hung up, Luna was watching me with a concerned expression. You're going to pay them out of your own money, aren't you? I can't let innocent people suffer because I'm settling scores with my parents. I was already calculating numbers in my head. $30,000 would make a significant dent in my savings, but I couldn't live with myself knowing that families were struggling because of my actions. What about the charitable donations? Can you reverse those? I shook my head. Once the money hits the charity accounts, reversing it becomes a legal nightmare. Besides, those organizations need the funding more than my father needs to cover his gambling debts. I opened my personal banking app and initiated a transfer to cover the construction company payroll. As I watched $30,000 disappear from my account, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because I was doing the right thing. Sadness because it confirmed what I'd already suspected. My parents had put me in a position where I was forced to choose between my principles and other people's welfare. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Natalie, whatever point you're trying to make has been made. Your mother is having chest pains from stress. Please call me so we can discuss this reasonably. The mention of Vivian's chest pains sent a spike of worry through me, but I forced myself to remember their calculated cruelty from yesterday. This was emotional manipulation, the same tactic they'd used my entire life to make me feel responsible for everyone else's feelings. Instead of calling, I opened my laptop and began making more strategic moves. If they wanted to play the victim card, I'd give them something to actually worry about. I accessed Richard's personal investment account, the one where he'd been hiding money from his business. Balance: $847,632. Almost enough to cover what they'd demanded from me. Conveniently sitting in an account I was listed as a beneficiary on for estate planning purposes. With a few clicks, I initiated a wire transfer from Richard's investment account to cover the charitable donations that had drained the business account, plus an additional $100,000 donation to the Children's Hospital Foundation in my grandmother's name. Let him explain to Vivian why their secret gambling fund was suddenly lighter. Luna watched over my shoulder as I worked. How are you so calm about this? Most people would be having a nervous breakdown. Because for the first time in my life, I'm not trying to make everyone else happy at my own expense, I said, initiating another transfer that would restore the construction company's operating balance. I spent 28 years being the responsible one, the peacekeeper, the daughter who never caused problems. And where did it get me? Homeless on my birthday for refusing to fund my sister's delusions. My phone rang again. This time it was Celeste, calling from what sounded like a very noisy restaurant. "Natalie, whatever game you're playing needs to stop right now," she said without preamble. "I had to cut my vacation short because Mom and Dad are falling apart. Do you have any idea how selfish you're being? About as selfish as demanding $750,000 that doesn't belong to you? That money could change all of our lives. This investment opportunity is real, and you're sabotaging our entire family's future because you're jealous that I found it first." I almost laughed. Jealous? Celeste, I've seen your investment opportunities before. Remember the boutique hotel in Costa Rica that turned out to be a timeshare scam? Or the cryptocurrency mining operation that was actually a pyramid scheme? This is different. Jameson knows people in Silicon Valley. This startup is going to revolutionize social media marketing. Jameson, I repeated slowly. Your boyfriend of 3 months who claims to be a tech entrepreneur but lives in his parents' guest house in Southampton? Silence. Then, you don't understand the complexity of startup funding. I understand that you've never worked a day in your life, never invested your own money in anything, and never faced consequences for your poor decisions because Mom and Dad always bail you out. Well, guess what? The bank of family obligation just closed. You're making a huge mistake. Celeste's voice turned cold. When I make millions from this investment, don't come crawling back asking for help. I won't, I said calmly. But when your imaginary millions don't materialize and you need someone to blame, look in the mirror. After I hung up, I realized something had fundamentally shifted in how I saw my family. The desperate phone calls, the guilt trips, the emotional manipulation. None of it was working anymore because I finally understood that their love had always been conditional. Conditional on my compliance, my usefulness, my willingness to sacrifice my own needs for theirs. "What's next?" Luna asked, refilling our coffee cups. I looked at my laptop screen, where multiple bank accounts and investment portfolios were displayed like a digital war room. Now I wait for them to realize that freezing their accounts was just the opening move. The real game is about to begin. By noon, I had restored payroll for the construction workers, donated another $150,000 of Richard's hidden gambling fund to various charities, and set up automatic monthly contributions from my parents' luxury spending accounts to organizations supporting financial literacy and addiction recovery. They wanted to learn about consequences? Class was officially in session. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, I was standing outside the gleaming glass facade of Meridian Financial Services, the wealth management firm where my parents had invested most of their money for the past decade. I'd made an appointment under my own name, using my status as an authorized representative on their accounts, to request an urgent family financial review. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 40s, greeted me with the kind of professional warmth reserved for clients with substantial portfolios. "Ms. Morrison, Mr. Davidson is ready to see you." He mentioned this was regarding the Hartwell family accounts. Thomas Davidson had been my parents' financial advisor since before I'd graduated college. A distinguished man in his late 50s with silver hair and expensive suits. He'd always treated me with polite dismissal during family meetings, clearly viewing me as the artistic daughter who didn't understand serious money matters. Today his demeanor was markedly different. "Natalie, please sit down," he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from his mahogany desk. "I have to say I'm quite concerned about the unusual activity we've been seeing on your parents' accounts over the past 24 hours. I settled into the chair and pulled out my laptop, adopting the same businesslike tone he'd always used with me. "That's exactly why I'm here, Mr. Davidson. I've been reviewing their financial situation, and I've discovered some irregularities that I think you should be aware of." His eyebrows rose slightly. "What kind of irregularities?" "Unauthorized gambling expenditures from business accounts, hidden investment transfers, and what appears to be systematic misrepresentation of their actual financial position." I turned my laptop toward him, showing the bank statements I'd compiled. I believe my parents may have been less than truthful about their spending habits and risk tolerance. Mr. Davidson's expression shifted from polite concern to genuine alarm as he reviewed the documents. These casino transfers. Richard never mentioned any gambling activities during our risk assessment meetings. "Because he's been funding them through business accounts and a secondary investment portfolio that I don't believe you're managing." I pulled up Richard's hidden account. "This Atlantic Shore casino account has received over $400,000 in transfers from Hartwell Construction in the past 8 months. The color drained from Mr. Davidson's face. "400,000? Natalie, if your father has a gambling addiction, this fundamentally changes our entire investment strategy. The risk profiles, the retirement planning, the estate considerations, everything we've built is based on conservative spending assumptions. Which is why I'm here. As someone with fiduciary authority on these accounts, I need to implement some protective measures immediately." I'd done my research during the drive to his office. As an authorized representative with power of attorney for financial decisions, something my parents had granted me during Richard's heart attack recovery and never revoked, I had significant legal authority to make changes to protect their assets from further gambling losses. "What kind of protective measures?" Mr. Davidson asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected where this conversation was heading. "I want to establish spending controls on all liquid assets, no withdrawals over $5,000 without dual authorization. All investment changes require written approval from both account holders and myself. And I want to set up automatic transfers to secure retirement accounts that can't be touched without penalty." Mr. Davidson was quiet for a long moment, reviewing the documents I'd provided. "Natalie, these are dramatic steps. Have you discussed this with your parents?" "My parents asked me to handle their financial affairs when they felt overwhelmed by the complexity. They've made it clear that they trust my judgment in these matters." It wasn't technically a lie. They had asked me to manage their finances. They just hadn't expected me to use that authority to protect them from themselves. "I'll need to verify your authorization status," he said, reaching for his phone. "Of course. You'll find all the paperwork in order. Power of attorney documents filed in 2021, still valid and unrevoked." While Mr. Davidson made calls to verify my legal standing, I continued reviewing their portfolio on my laptop. What I found made my stomach drop. Beyond the gambling losses, Richard had been making increasingly risky investment choices over the past year. Cryptocurrency speculation, penny stock purchases, high-risk tech startups, all decisions that flew in the face of the conservative strategy they'd claimed to follow. "Your authorization checks out," Mr. Davidson said, hanging up his phone. "But Natalie, I have to ask, are your parents aware you're implementing these controls?" "They will be shortly. Right now they're dealing with some temporary account access issues while we sort out these irregularities." I met his gaze directly. "Mr. Davidson, my parents are currently pressuring me to liquidate my inheritance to cover what they're calling an, quote, investment opportunity. Given what we've discovered about my father's gambling habits, I think you can understand my concerns about the legitimacy of this request." His expression hardened. "They asked you to liquidate your grandmother's trust fund?" $750,000. "They claim it's for my sister's startup investment, but based on this financial history, I suspect it's actually to cover gambling debts and risky investment losses." Mr. Davidson began typing rapidly on his computer. "We need to implement those protective measures immediately. If Richard has developed a gambling problem, and they're pressuring family members to cover losses, this could escalate quickly." Over the next hour, we restructured my parents' entire financial landscape. Spending limits were installed on all accounts. Investment authorities were restricted. Their high-risk positions were liquidated and moved to secure, penalty-protected retirement accounts. Most importantly, any attempts to access large sums of money would now require my approval in addition to theirs. "There's something else," Mr. Davidson said as we finalized the paperwork. "Your parents scheduled an appointment for tomorrow morning." According to my notes, they wanted to discuss liquidating assets for a family investment opportunity. They were planning to cash out investments to fund Celeste's fantasy? Apparently so. Richard specifically asked about accessing his retirement accounts early, despite the substantial penalties involved. The pieces were falling into place. My parents weren't just asking me to fund Celeste's scheme. They were prepared to destroy their own financial security to do it. The gambling addiction had put them in a desperate position, and rather than admit the truth, they decided to drag the entire family down with them. What happens when they show up tomorrow and find out about these changes? Mr. Davidson looked uncomfortable. They'll be informed that protective measures have been implemented due to concerns about financial decision-making capacity and potential addiction issues. They can contest the measures, but given the documentation you've provided and your legal authority, it would require significant legal intervention. My phone had been buzzing constantly during our meeting. I checked the messages to find increasingly frantic texts from both parents and Celeste. The latest was from Vivian. "Natalie, the bank called and said there are, quote, protective measures on our accounts. What have you done? Call me immediately." "They're starting to realize the scope of what's happening," I told Mr. Davidson, showing him the messages. "Are you prepared for their reaction? This level of financial intervention typically results in significant family conflict." I thought about yesterday. The casual cruelty in their voices, the way they'd opened the door and told me to leave, the complete dismissal of 28 years of love and loyalty. Then I thought about Jake Castellanos and his crew. Hardworking people who'd almost lost their paychecks because of my father's hidden gambling addiction. Mr. Davidson, they declared war on me when they decided my inheritance was theirs to claim. I'm just making sure they can't destroy anyone else's life while they're destroying their own. As I left Meridian Financial Services, I felt a strange sense of completion. The protective measures were in place, the gambling addiction was documented with a licensed financial professional, and my parents would soon discover that their attempt to manipulate me had backfired spectacularly. My phone rang as I reached my car. It was Richard, and for the first time since this began, I decided to answer. "Natalie, thank God," his voice was strained with panic. "Something's wrong with our accounts. The bank is saying there are protective holds, and Thomas Davidson's office called to confirm an appointment we apparently made with you. What's going on?" "What's going on, Dad, is that I've been doing my job, the job you gave me when you asked me to manage your finances. I've discovered some concerning patterns in your spending, and I've taken steps to protect your assets." "What kind of patterns?" $400,000 in gambling losses, unauthorized high-risk investments, and systematic depletion of business assets. Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When Richard finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "How did you find out about Atlantic Shore?" "The same way I found out about everything else. I've been managing your finances, remember? Every transaction, every transfer, every late-night casino visit charged to your business account." I paused, letting the weight of his exposure sink in. "The question is, how were you planning to cover those losses? With my inheritance?" "Natalie, you don't understand the pressure I've been under. The business is struggling. Your mother's medical bills from her surgery last year, Celeste's expenses. So you decided gambling was the solution? And when that didn't work, you'd just take my money to fix your mistakes?" "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I had a system, a strategy. I was going to win it back." The pathetic desperation in his voice almost made me feel sorry for him. Almost. "Dad, I've implemented protective measures on all your accounts. No large withdrawals, no high-risk investments, no access to retirement funds without proper authorization. Consider it an intervention." "You can't do this. That's our money, our lives. And I'm saving both, whether you realize it or not." I hung up and sat in my car for a moment, processing what had just happened. In less than 48 hours, I'd gone from dutiful daughter to financial guardian of the people who'd tried to destroy my future for my sister's whims. Tomorrow, when they showed up at Mr. Davidson's office expecting to liquidate their retirement to fund Celeste's fantasy, they'd discover that their safety net was no longer theirs to burn. The student had officially become the teacher. I was having breakfast at Luna's kitchen table the next morning when my phone exploded with notifications. Text after text, voicemail after voicemail, and then the calls started coming in rapid succession. First Vivian, then Richard, then Celeste, then numbers I didn't recognize. "Looks like they found out about yesterday's financial restructuring," Luna said, glancing at my buzzing phone while pouring orange juice. I let the calls go to voicemail and opened my laptop instead. What I saw made my coffee cup freeze halfway to my lips. My email inbox showed 17 new messages, all from the same sender, a private investigator named Marcus Chen, no relation to the name I'd avoided, with the subject line, "Urgent, Family Financial Investigation, Immediate Response Required." "Luna, look at this," I said, turning the screen toward her. The first email was timestamped at 6:23 a.m. "Ms. Morrison, I have been retained by Richard and Vivian Hartwell to investigate suspicious financial activity on their accounts. Please contact me immediately to discuss your recent unauthorized transactions and account manipulations." "They hired a private investigator?" Luna read over my shoulder. That escalated quickly. But as I scrolled through the subsequent emails, a clearer picture emerged. The investigator had done his homework overnight and uncovered far more than my parents had probably intended him to find. Email number 7, sent at 8:15 a.m., contained a detailed financial analysis that made my blood run cold. After reviewing the provided documentation, I have discovered evidence of systematic financial mismanagement, undisclosed gambling debts totaling $847,000, tax evasion schemes involving business expense manipulation, and potential money laundering through construction project accounts. "Oh my God," I whispered, reading further. "Luna, my father hasn't just been gambling. He's been running money through fake construction projects to hide income from the IRS." The investigator's report laid out a scheme that had been running for over 2 years. Richard had been creating invoices for non-existent construction projects, paying shell companies that he controlled, then using those payments to fund his gambling addiction while claiming them as legitimate business expenses on his taxes. "The total undeclared income appears to exceed $1.2 million, I read aloud from email number 12. Additionally, there are discrepancies in payroll tax reporting that suggest systematic wage theft from employees. Luna sat down heavily beside me. "Wage theft? Natalie, that's serious criminal activity." My hands were shaking as I opened the attachment containing bank records I'd never seen before. Hidden accounts, offshore transfers, complex financial instruments designed to obscure money trails. My father hadn't just been gambling. He'd been operating what amounted to a criminal enterprise, disguised as a legitimate construction business. The final email, sent just 20 minutes ago, was the most damning. "Ms. Morrison, based on my investigation, I believe your parents retained my services under false pretenses. They claimed you had stolen money from them, but the evidence suggests you may have actually discovered and documented their illegal financial activities. I am legally obligated to report my findings to the appropriate authorities. Please contact me immediately if you have additional information that could assist in this investigation." I stared at the screen, my mind reeling. My parents hadn't just kicked me out for refusing to fund Celeste's fantasy. They'd kicked me out because they were terrified I'd discover their criminal activities. The $750,000 they demanded wasn't for an investment opportunity. It was to cover up federal crimes. My phone rang, displaying a number I didn't recognize. This time, I answered. "Ms. Morrison, this is Detective Sarah Walsh with the Millbrook Financial Crimes Unit. I understand you may have information relevant to an ongoing investigation into Hartwell Construction." "An ongoing investigation?" My voice came out as a croak. We've been monitoring suspicious activity related to construction industry money laundering for several months. When a private investigator contacted us this morning with documentation suggesting systematic tax evasion and employee wage theft, your name came up as someone with access to the relevant financial records. I looked at Luna, who was listening to my side of the conversation with growing alarm. Detective Walsh, I think I need to speak with a lawyer. That's certainly your right, but I want to be clear. Our preliminary investigation suggests you may be a witness, not a suspect. The financial protective measures you implemented yesterday actually prevented additional criminal activity from occurring. Prevented criminal activity? According to the documentation we've received, your parents were planning to liquidate retirement accounts and business assets to cover gambling debts. Those accounts contained money that was illegally diverted from employee paychecks and tax obligations. By freezing their access, you essentially preserved evidence of their crimes. I felt like I was falling through space. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about my father's business, about the source of their comfortable lifestyle, was a lie built on criminal activity. Detective Walsh, I had no idea about any criminal activity. I was just trying to protect them from making poor financial decisions. We understand that. But, Ms. Morrison, we're going to need your cooperation in documenting what you discovered. Your access to their financial records could be crucial in building a case that protects the employees who've been victimized by this scheme. After I hung up, Luna and I sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Finally, she spoke. So let me get this straight. Your parents kicked you out for refusing to give them money to cover up federal crimes, then hired a private investigator to prove you were the criminal, but the investigator discovered they were actually the criminals and reported them to the police? That's about the size of it, I said weakly. My phone buzzed with a text from Celeste. Natalie, whatever you've done, you need to fix it right now. Mom and Dad are talking about fleeing the country. This has gone way too far. Fleeing the country? My parents, the people who'd raised me to believe in responsibility and consequences, were considering becoming fugitives rather than face the results of their own actions. Another text came through, this one from Richard. Natalie, I know how this looks, but you don't understand the pressure I was under. The business was failing, your mother's medical bills were overwhelming us, and I just needed time to turn things around. Please don't let them destroy our family over some paperwork mistakes. Paperwork mistakes. He was calling tax evasion and wage theft, quote, paperwork mistakes. I called Detective Walsh back. Detective, I want to fully cooperate with your investigation. My father's employees deserve to get their stolen wages back, and the IRS deserves their taxes. But I need to know, what happens to my parents? That depends on the scope of the crimes and their cooperation with our investigation. Financial crimes of this magnitude typically result in federal charges, substantial fines, and potential prison time. However, cooperation and asset recovery can significantly impact sentencing. And my sister, she had no knowledge of any of this. From what we've gathered so far, your sister appears to be an unwitting beneficiary of criminal proceeds, but not an active participant in the crimes themselves. After the call, I opened my laptop and began downloading every financial document I had access to. Bank statements, payroll records, tax filings, investment portfolios, everything that could help investigators understand the full scope of my father's criminal enterprise. As I worked, I thought about Jake Castellanos and the other construction workers whose paychecks had bounced because of my father's crimes. They'd trusted Richard to pay them fairly for their labor, never knowing he was skimming money from their wages to fund his gambling addiction. My phone rang again. This time it was Vivian, and her voice was barely recognizable through her tears. Natalie, please, you have to help us. The police came to the house this morning with a search warrant. They're seizing everything. Our cars, our bank accounts, even my jewelry. They're saying your father could go to prison for 20 years. Mom, I didn't cause this, I just discovered it. But you're the one who gave them the information. You're the one who called the authorities. I didn't call anyone. Dad hired a private investigator who discovered his crimes and reported them to the police. This is the consequence of his choices, not mine. We're your family, Vivian sobbed. How can you just stand by and watch them destroy us? I thought about the past 48 hours. The casual cruelty of being kicked out on my birthday, the entitled demands for my inheritance, the willingness to sacrifice my future for Celeste's whims. Then I thought about the construction workers who'd been robbed, the IRS that had been cheated, the complex web of lies my parents had built their entire lifestyle around. Mom, I've spent my whole life trying to hold this family together, but I can't protect you from the consequences of crimes I didn't know you were committing. So you're just going to abandon us, let us lose everything? You abandoned me first. The difference is, I never committed any federal crimes. When I hung up, Luna was watching me with a mixture of admiration and concern. How are you holding up? She asked gently. I keep thinking about Grandma Delilah, I said, staring at my laptop screen filled with evidence of my family's corruption. She worked her whole life honestly, saved every penny legitimately, and left me that inheritance as a symbol of hard work and integrity. My parents wanted me to use that clean money to cover up their dirty money. What are you going to do now? I thought about Detective Walsh's words, about the employees who'd been victimized, about the choice between protecting my family's crimes and protecting their victims. I'm going to help the police recover every stolen dollar and make sure it gets back to the people who earned it. My parents made their choices. Now they get to live with the consequences. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was on the right side of something. Not just personal revenge, but actual justice. The daughter they'd tried to manipulate was about to become the witness who brought down their entire criminal enterprise. 3 days later, I found myself sitting in a sterile conference room at the Millbrook Police Department, surrounded by federal agents, local detectives, and enough paperwork to fill a small library. The transformation from rejected daughter to key witness in a federal investigation had happened so quickly that I still felt like I was living someone else's life. Special Agent Jennifer Park from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division had taken over the case once the scope of Richard's criminal enterprise became clear. A sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s with an MBA in forensic accounting, she'd spent the past 72 hours dissecting every financial document I'd provided with the precision of a surgeon. Natalie, I want you to understand the magnitude of what we're dealing with here, Agent Park said, spreading a series of charts across the conference table. Your father's operation wasn't just simple tax evasion or employee wage theft. This was a sophisticated money laundering scheme that may have connections to organized crime. I stared at the organizational chart she'd created, showing Hartwell Construction at the center of a web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and fictitious business relationships. Organized crime? My father builds houses and office buildings. Your father's construction company was being used to launder money for a gambling syndicate based out of Atlantic City. The fake invoices, the inflated project costs, the mysterious subcontractors. It was all designed to make illegal gambling proceeds appear legitimate. Detective Walsh, who'd been quietly taking notes, looked up from her tablet. We've identified at least 17 construction projects over the past 2 years where your father inflated costs by 40 to 60% and kicked the excess back to the gambling operation through various shell companies. So the money he was stealing from his employees and hiding from the IRS was going to actual criminals? That's correct. And when his gambling debts exceeded his ability to generate false invoices, the syndicate started pressuring him for larger payments. That's likely why he became so desperate for your inheritance money. Agent Park pulled out another document, a transcript I recognized as a recorded phone conversation. We obtained a warrant to monitor your parents' communications after the private investigator's report. This conversation took place yesterday evening between your father and someone we believe to be Vincent Torino, a known associate of the Carlisle crime family. She pressed play on a digital recorder, and I heard my father's voice, stressed and pleading. Vincent, I need more time. My daughter has frozen all my accounts, and the feds are asking questions. I can get you the money, but I need another week." The voice that responded was cold and calculating. "Richard, you've had 2 years to get your house in order. We've been more than patient, but patience has limits. You owe us $1.2 million plus interest. Find a way to pay, or we'll find other ways to collect." "You can't threaten my family. My daughter doesn't know anything about this." "Your daughter is the one who put protective holds on your accounts. Sounds like she knows plenty. Maybe we should have a conversation with her directly." The recording ended, leaving the conference room in heavy silence. I felt ice form in my stomach as the implications sank in. "They're threatening me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Agent Park nodded grimly. "Which is why we're offering you federal protection while this investigation proceeds. These people don't make idle threats, Natalie." "Federal protection? Like witness protection?" "Not full witness relocation, but secure housing and 24-hour monitoring until we can arrest the key players in this operation." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "Your financial maneuvers didn't just expose your father's crimes. They disrupted a criminal money laundering operation. That makes you both a valuable witness and a potential target." My phone, which had been face down on the table, buzzed with an incoming call. The display showed an unknown number, and Agent Park quickly gestured for me to answer while she activated recording equipment. "Hello?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is this Natalie Morrison?" The voice was unfamiliar, with a slight accent I couldn't place. "Who's asking?" "Someone who's very interested in your family's financial situation. I understand you've been making some changes to your parents' accounts." Agent Park was frantically writing notes and showing them to Detective Walsh. I could see her mouthing words like "keep talking" and "trace in progress." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. "Of course you don't. But here's what I do know. Your father owes my associates a substantial amount of money, and your interference with his accounts has made it very difficult for him to pay his debts. That sounds like a problem between you and my father." The voice turned cold. "It became your problem when you froze assets that belonged to us. Money that was earmarked for debt repayment is now tied up in federal investigations because of your actions." "I didn't know about any debts. I was just protecting my parents from making poor financial decisions." "Well, now you do know. And here's what's going to happen next. You're going to reverse those account holds and transfer $1.2 million to a location we specify. If you don't, we'll consider your entire family to be in default on their obligations." Agent Park was nodding vigorously, encouraging me to keep the conversation going while technical staff worked to trace the call. "I can't reverse federal investigations," I said. "The FBI has seized the accounts." "Then you have a problem. Because our business arrangement with your father doesn't recognize federal jurisdiction, debts get paid one way or another." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm explaining reality. You have 72 hours to find a solution, or we'll find one for you." The line went dead. I sat staring at my phone while the room erupted in controlled chaos. Agents making calls, Detective Walsh coordinating with tech support, everyone suddenly moving with urgent purpose. "Did you get a trace?" Agent Park asked her technical team. "Partial. The call originated from a burner phone in Atlantic City, but it was routed through multiple relays. We're working on narrowing down the location." I felt like I was drowning in the reality of my situation. "So let me understand this. Because I tried to protect my parents from their own bad decisions, I'm now being threatened by organized crime?" "That's an accurate summary," Agent Park said. "But Natalie, you need to understand something important. Your father got involved with these people voluntarily. He knew exactly what kind of operation he was feeding money into. The gambling, the money laundering, the employee theft, all of it was designed to service debts to criminal organizations." Detective Walsh pulled out another file. "We've been investigating the Carlyle family's construction industry connections for 3 years. Your father's operation was one of their most successful money laundering fronts. The $1.2 million they're demanding isn't just gambling debts. It's payment for providing laundering services. So my father was essentially an employee of organized crime? More like a franchise operator. He got to keep a percentage of the laundered money in exchange for running the construction company as a front operation. My phone buzzed with a text message from Celeste. Natalie, some very scary men came to the house looking for Dad. Mom is hysterical, and Dad has locked himself in his office. Whatever you've done, you need to fix it now. Agent Park read the message over my shoulder. We need to get your family into protective custody immediately. The 72-hour deadline suggests they're escalating quickly. What about my sister? She doesn't know anything about this. Everyone in your immediate family is potentially at risk until we can neutralize this threat. I thought about Celeste, spoiled and entitled but ultimately innocent of her father's crimes. About Vivian, who might have suspected Richard's gambling but probably never imagined the criminal connections. About the construction workers who'd trusted my father and ended up as unwitting participants in a money laundering scheme. Agent Park, if I cooperate fully with your investigation, if I testify against my father and help you build a case against these criminals, what happens to my family? Your father will likely face significant federal charges: money laundering, tax evasion, racketeering. He's looking at decades in prison. Your mother could face charges as an accessory if we can prove she knew about the criminal activity. Your sister would likely be considered a victim rather than a perpetrator. And if I don't cooperate? Then we lose our best chance to bring down a major criminal money laundering operation. Your father probably ends up dead for failing to pay his debts, and you spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. I stared at the organizational chart showing my father's construction company connected to a web of criminal enterprises. 3 days ago, my biggest problem was entitled parents demanding my inheritance. Now I was being asked to choose between protecting my family from federal prosecution and protecting myself from organized crime retaliation. There's something else you should know, Agent Park said quietly. The $750,000 your parents demanded from you? That was the exact amount your father needed to settle his debts with the Carlyle organization. They weren't planning to invest it in your sister's business opportunity. They were planning to use it to buy their way out of a criminal enterprise. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. My parents hadn't just been willing to sacrifice my inheritance for Celeste's fantasy. They'd been willing to sacrifice it to cover up their own criminal activities. They'd been prepared to rob their daughter's future to pay off organized crime debts. Agent Park, I said, my voice steady for the first time in days, what do you need me to do? The choice between family loyalty and justice had just become very clear. My family had made their bed with criminals. Now they would have to lie in it. But I didn't have to lie down with them. The safe house was a nondescript 2-bedroom apartment in a residential complex 20 miles outside Millbrook, the kind of place where federal agents could blend in with graduate students and young professionals. I'd been there for 6 days, living under 24-hour protection, while Agent Park and her team built their case against the Carlyle organization using the financial records I'd provided. My family, meanwhile, had been moved to a separate secure location after the scary men Celeste had mentioned turned out to be Vincent Torino and 2 associates who'd showed up at my parents' house demanding immediate payment. The 72-hour deadline had passed, and according to Agent Park, the criminal organization was now treating the Hartwell family as hostile debtors rather than business partners. I was reviewing bank statements for the 100th time when my phone rang with a call from Luna, who'd been designated as my primary outside contact during the protection period. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice carrying the careful tone people use when they're worried about your mental state. "I feel like I'm living in a movie where someone else is playing the main character," I said, looking out the apartment window at Agent Martinez, who was posing as a jogger while maintaining surveillance on the parking lot. 6 months ago, my biggest worry was whether to expand my design business. Now I'm hiding from the mob because I discovered my father was laundering money. Any word on when this might be over? Agent Park says they're moving fast. They've arrested 3 of the shell company operators and seized about $2.4 million in assets so far. But the main targets, Vincent Torino and the higher-ups in the Carlyle organization, are still at large. What I didn't tell Luna was that the investigation had taken an unexpected turn. The financial records I'd provided had led agents to discover that the Carlyle organization was much larger than anyone had suspected, with money laundering operations in 6 states and connections to international criminal networks. Have you heard from your family? They're not allowed to contact me directly, but Agent Park gives me updates. Dad's cooperating with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence recommendation. Mom's claiming she had no knowledge of the criminal activity, which might actually be true. And Celeste. I paused, still processing the latest update. Celeste is demanding to know why she can't access her trust fund. She has a trust fund? Apparently, Dad set one up for her 3 years ago using laundered money. The FBI seized it as proceeds of criminal activity. She's threatening to sue everyone involved for, quote, financial harassment. Luna was quiet for a moment. So she still doesn't understand what's happening? She understands that her comfortable lifestyle has disappeared, but she seems to think it's my fault rather than Dad's. According to Agent Park, she's been asking when she can go back to her normal life and whether the government will compensate her for the, quote, inconvenience of protective custody. My laptop chimed with an encrypted email from Agent Park. New development, need to discuss immediately. Luna, I have to go. The FBI needs to talk to me. 20 minutes later, Agent Park arrived at the safe house with Detective Walsh and a man I didn't recognize, a tall, serious-looking individual in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Chen. Natalie, we have a significant development in the case, Agent Park began, settling into the apartment's small living room. Vincent Torino was arrested this morning during a raid on a warehouse operation in Atlantic City. I felt a surge of relief. So the threat is over? Not exactly, Attorney Chen said. Torino's arrest has created a power vacuum in the organization, and his lieutenant, Anthony Carlyle, has decided that eliminating witnesses is preferable to risking a lengthy federal investigation. The relief evaporated. Eliminating witnesses? We intercepted communications suggesting that Carlyle has put contracts out on your father and potentially other family members who could testify about the money laundering operation, Detective Walsh explained. The amount of financial evidence you've provided makes your testimony particularly valuable to our prosecution and particularly threatening to their organization. Agent Park pulled out a tablet showing surveillance footage. This was taken outside the courthouse yesterday during your father's arraignment hearing. The video showed Richard walking up the courthouse steps in handcuffs, flanked by federal marshals. But what made my blood run cold was the figure standing across the street. A man in a dark coat taking photographs with a telephoto lens. Anthony Carlyle, Agent Park said. He's personally surveilling your family members. That suggests this has become a priority target for their organization. What does that mean for my family's safety? Attorney Chen leaned forward. It means we need to accelerate our timeline. We were planning to build the case methodically over several months, but these new threats require immediate action. What kind of immediate action? We want to offer you and your family enrollment in the Federal Witness Security Program, Agent Park said. Full relocation, new identities, complete severing of ties to your previous lives. The words hit me like a physical blow. Witness protection? Forever? The program has an excellent track record for keeping witnesses safe, Detective Walsh said. But yes, it would mean permanent relocation and new identities for anyone who enrolls. I stared at them, trying to process the enormity of what they were suggesting. What about my business, my friends, my entire life? Those would all have to be left behind, Attorney Chen said gently. I know it's a difficult decision, but we believe it's the safest option given the current threat level. What if I refuse? Then we'll continue providing protection during the trial period. But after that, you'd be on your own against a criminal organization that has demonstrated both the willingness and ability to eliminate threats. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Natalie, this is Celeste. They gave me a secure phone. Mom told me about the witness protection thing. You have to say no, I can't disappear forever because of Dad's mistakes. Please don't ruin all our lives. Agent Park read the message over my shoulder. Your family is having the same conversation at their secure location. The decision has to be unanimous. Either everyone enters the program together, or no one does. And if we don't all agree, then the family members who refuse protection would likely become targets. The Carlyle organization doesn't distinguish between willing and unwilling witnesses. They eliminate anyone who poses a threat to their operation. I thought about Celeste, 25 years old and completely unprepared for a life hiding from criminals. About Vivian, who'd built her entire identity around social status and community connections. About Richard, whose gambling addiction had created this nightmare for everyone. How long do I have to decide? 24 hours, Attorney Chen said. We need to move quickly if we're going to relocate your family before Carlyle's people locate your current safe houses. After they left, I sat alone in the sterile apartment, staring at my laptop screen filled with evidence of my father's crimes. Bank statements showing millions of dollars in laundered money. Email chains documenting fake construction projects. Phone records connecting Richard to known criminals. 6 months ago, I'd been planning to expand my graphic design business and maybe buy a small house. Now I was being asked to choose between disappearing forever and risking death at the hands of organized crime. My phone rang. It was a call from the secure facility where my family was being held. Natalie? It was my mother's voice, shaky and desperate. Agent Park said you're the one who has to make the final decision about witness protection. We all have to agree, Mom. It's not just my decision. But you're the one with all the financial information. You're the key witness. If you refuse to testify, maybe they'll leave the rest of us alone. The suggestion hung in the air between us. She was asking me to sacrifice myself to save the family that had kicked me out for refusing to fund their criminal activities. Mom, if I don't testify, Dad will probably spend the rest of his life in prison, and the Carlyle organization will still see you as loose ends that need to be tied up. But if we disappear into witness protection, we lose everything. Our home, our friends, our lives. Celeste will never forgive us. I'll never see my garden again or have coffee with my book club And if we don't enter protection, you might not live to see any of those things anyway. Vivian was crying now. How did this happen? How did our family fall apart so completely? I looked around the safe house apartment. Generic furniture, bulletproof windows, armed agents in the hallway, and realized that this was what the consequences of my father's choices looked like. Not just legal troubles or financial ruin, but the complete destruction of everything we'd built as a family. It happened because Dad chose gambling debts over his family's safety, I said quietly, and now we all have to live with those consequences. Natalie, please, there has to be another way. There is another way. We can refuse protection and hope the FBI catches all the criminals before they catch us. Are you willing to bet your life on those odds? The silence stretched between us until Vivian whispered, I don't know how to live as someone else. I don't know how to live looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life. 24 hours to decide between two impossible choices: disappear forever or risk everything on the hope that justice would move faster than revenge. Either way, the family I'd grown up in was already gone. The decision came down to a family meeting in a windowless conference room at the FBI field office, with federal agents stationed outside and surveillance equipment recording every word. 23 hours and 47 minutes after the ultimatum, we sat around a metal table like strangers forced to negotiate a hostage exchange. Richard looked like he'd aged a decade in the past week. His usually confident posture had collapsed into a defensive hunch, and his hands shook as he reached for the coffee cup that Agent Park had provided. The orange jumpsuit of federal custody had replaced his expensive polo shirts, and the man who'd once commanded construction sites now couldn't meet his family's eyes. Vivian sat rigidly beside him, her designer clothes wrinkled from days in protective custody. She'd been crying. Her eyes were red and swollen, but she'd composed herself for this meeting with the same determination she'd once applied to charity galas and book club presentations. Celeste had positioned herself as far from the rest of us as the small room allowed, At 25, she'd never faced real consequences for anything, and the reality of potentially losing her identity forever had transformed her usual entitled confidence into barely controlled panic. "Let me be clear about what we're discussing," Attorney Chen began, spreading documents across the table. "If the family chooses witness protection, you'll be relocated to different parts of the country under new identities. Contact between family members would be severely limited and monitored. Your previous lives would essentially cease to exist." "And if we refuse?" Celeste asked, her voice sharp with anxiety. Agent Park answered, "Based on intercepted communications, Anthony Carlisle has authorized contracts on family members who could testify about the money laundering operation. That includes everyone in this room." "But I don't know anything about money laundering," Celeste protested. "I thought Dad was just a successful contractor." "You benefited from criminal proceeds," Detective Walsh explained patiently. "Your college tuition, your credit cards, your trust fund, all funded by laundered money. The Carlisle organization doesn't distinguish between knowing and unknowing beneficiaries." Richard finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is my fault. I should be the only one facing consequences." "It's too late for that," I said, surprised by the coldness in my own voice. "When you decided to launder money for criminals, you made the choice for all of us." "Natalie, I never intended." "You never intended to get caught," I interrupted. "But you knew exactly what you were doing. You knew where the money was coming from. You knew you were stealing from your employees, and you knew you were lying to the IRS. The only thing you didn't plan for was someone discovering your crimes." Vivian reached across the table toward me. "Honey, we're still a family. We need to stick together through this." I pulled my hand away. "Are we? Because a week ago you threw me out of the house for refusing to fund this criminal enterprise. You were willing to sacrifice my inheritance to cover up Dad's gambling debts." "We didn't know about the criminal connections," Vivian said desperately. "But you knew about the gambling. You knew Dad was hiding money and making risky investments. You just didn't care as long as it didn't affect your lifestyle." Agent Park cleared her throat. "We need to make a decision. The threat assessment indicates that Carlisle's people are actively searching for your current locations." "I won't do it," Celeste said suddenly. "I won't give up my entire life because Dad made stupid choices. I'm 25 years old. I'm supposed to be starting my career, maybe getting married, building a future. I can't do that hiding in some small town under a fake name." "And I can't do it worrying that you're going to be murdered by criminals," I shot back. "Then maybe you shouldn't have frozen the accounts that could have paid them off." The accusation hung in the air like a slap. After everything we'd learned, the money laundering, the employee theft, the connections to organized crime, Celeste was still blaming me for exposing our father's criminal activities rather than blaming him for committing them. "Are you seriously suggesting I should have funded a criminal organization?" "I am suggesting you should have minded your own business instead of playing detective with other people's lives." Richard slammed his hand on the table, making everyone jump. "Enough! Celeste, your sister saved you from becoming an accessory to federal crimes. If she hadn't discovered what I was doing, you would have taken that $750,000 and invested it directly into the criminal operation. You'd be facing charges right now instead of sitting in protective custody." "What are you talking about?" Agent Park pulled out a file I hadn't seen before. "The investment opportunity your boyfriend Jameson presented wasn't a legitimate startup. It was another money laundering front operated by the Carlisle organization. If your sister had given you that money, you would have essentially been making a direct payment to organized crime." Celeste's face went white. "That's impossible. Jameson said it was a tech company in Silicon Valley. Jameson Westbrook has connections to multiple criminal enterprises. The startup was a shell company designed to legitimize criminal proceeds through fake investment schemes." I watched my sister process this information, seeing her entire worldview crumble in real time. The boyfriend she'd trusted, the investment opportunity she'd been so excited about, the future she'd been planning, all of it had been part of the same criminal web that had destroyed our family. "So everything was a lie," she whispered. "Not everything," Vivian said, reaching for Celeste's hand. "We're still a family. We still love each other." "Do we?" I asked quietly, because love doesn't usually come with ultimatums about giving away inheritance money. Love doesn't usually involve kicking people out on their birthdays. And love definitely doesn't involve asking someone to cover up federal crimes. The room fell silent except for the hum of the ventilation system and the distant sound of phones ringing in the FBI office beyond our door. Attorney Chen checked his watch. "We need a decision. The protection window is closing." I looked around the table at the people who'd raised me, who'd shared holidays and vacations and countless family dinners. The people who'd been willing to sacrifice my future to protect their secrets. "I'll enter witness protection," I said finally, "but I want to be relocated alone, not with the family group." "Natalie, no," Vivian gasped. "We need to stay together." "Why? So you can blame me for the next crisis Dad creates? So Celeste can resent me for ruining her life by exposing criminal activity? So I can spend the rest of my life enabling bad decisions and covering up consequences?" "We're your family," Richard said, his voice breaking. "You were my family when it was convenient for you, when you needed someone to manage your finances, pay your bills, and clean up your messes. But the moment I refused to participate in funding criminal activity, I became expendable." Agent Park was taking notes, documenting our family's final dissolution for federal records. "Natalie, you understand that choosing individual relocation means you'll have no contact with your family members, even if they also enter protection?" "I understand." "And you're prepared for the psychological impact of severing all family ties?" I thought about the past week. The threats, the revelations, the complete collapse of everything I'd believed about my family. Then I thought about the construction workers whose wages had been stolen, the IRS agents investigating tax evasion, the criminal organization that was still operating because people like my father had enabled them. "My family ties were severed when they chose criminals over their own daughter," I said. "I'm just making it official." Celeste was crying now, but whether from fear, anger, or genuine loss, I couldn't tell. Vivian was staring at me like I was a stranger, and Richard was hunched over the table as if the weight of his choices had finally become too much to bear. "The marshals will begin relocation procedures immediately," Attorney Chen said, gathering his documents. "Natalie, you'll be moved to a transition facility tonight, and your new identity will be established within 72 hours. As federal agents began processing paperwork and making phone calls, I sat in that sterile conference room and realized that the family meeting was also a funeral. We were burying the Hartwell family, not just changing our names, but acknowledging that the relationships between us had been built on lies, manipulation, and conditional love. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a daughter who would have done anything to protect her family. Now I was a federal witness who'd chosen justice over blood relations. The transformation was complete. 6 months after entering witness protection, I was living in a small coastal town in Oregon under the name Sarah Chen, managing a nonprofit organization that helped small businesses recover from financial fraud. The irony wasn't lost on me. My experience uncovering my father's criminal enterprise had qualified me for a job helping other families rebuild after similar betrayals. The house I rented was nothing like the Riverside Heights mansion where I'd grown up, but it was mine in a way that place had never been. A modest 2-bedroom cottage, 3 blocks from the ocean, with a garden I was learning to tend, and neighbors who knew me as the quiet woman who'd moved west after a difficult divorce. I was reviewing grant applications on a rainy Thursday morning when my secure phone rang, the encrypted device that connected me to my handler, Deputy Marshal Rebecca Torres. "Sarah, we need to talk," she said, using my new name out of habit even on secure lines. "There's been a development in the Carlisle case." My coffee went cold as I listened to what had happened. Anthony Carlisle had been arrested during a multi-state raid that dismantled the remainder of his criminal organization. The FBI had recovered over $12 million in assets and arrested 43 people involved in the money laundering network that my father had fed for 3 years. "The good news is that the threat to your safety has been eliminated," Marshal Torres continued. "Carlisle and his key lieutenants are facing life sentences, and the organization has been completely dismantled." And the bad news? Your family's case has been resolved. Your father received 8 years in federal prison with early parole possible in 5 years due to his cooperation. Your mother received 2 years of supervised probation and community service. She was deemed to have had minimal knowledge of the criminal activity. I waited for her to mention Celeste, but the silence stretched uncomfortably long. What about my sister? Celeste refused witness protection and attempted to return to her previous life. She was arrested 3 months ago for conspiracy to commit wire fraud. My heart sank. What happened? After your family was released from protective custody, she moved to Miami and became involved with another criminal enterprise. Insurance fraud this time, staging fake accidents and filing false claims. She was working with the same Jamison Westbrook who had originally connected your family to the Carlyle organization. I set down my coffee cup with shaking hands. Even after everything we'd learned about Jamison's criminal connections, Celeste had gone back to him. Even after seeing what criminal activity had done to our family, she'd chosen to repeat the same patterns. She claimed she needed money to maintain her lifestyle after your father's assets were seized, Marshall Torres continued. The insurance fraud was supposedly temporary, just until she could, quote, get back on her feet. How much time is she facing? 7 to 10 years, depending on how much cooperation she provides with the investigation. The Miami operation was much larger than your father's construction scheme. They defrauded insurance companies out of over $8 million. I stared out my cottage window at the Pacific Ocean, watching waves crash against the rocky coastline. My sister, the person I'd tried to protect by entering witness protection, had chosen to become exactly what our father had been, a willing participant in criminal enterprise. There's more, Marshall Torres said. Your witness protection status is being reviewed. With the criminal organization eliminated, and your testimony no longer needed for ongoing prosecutions, you're eligible to reclaim your original identity if you choose. Reclaim my identity? You could legally become Natalie Morrison again, return to your previous life, reconnect with friends, restart your business. The threat that necessitated your disappearance no longer exists. I thought about Luna, who believed I'd moved to Seattle to start over after my family's financial difficulties. About my graphic design clients, who'd been told I was taking an extended sabbatical. About the life I'd built in Millbrook before everything fell apart. What about my family? If I reclaim my identity, would I have contact with them again? That would be your choice. Your mother has been asking about you through her probation officer. She's expressed interest in reconciliation if you're open to it. The idea of seeing Vivian again sent a complex mix of emotions through me. 6 months of distance had dulled the sharp edges of my anger, but it hadn't erased the memory of being cast out on my birthday, or blamed for exposing criminal activity that had endangered innocent people. Has she acknowledged what really happened? Does she understand why I made the choices I did? According to her probation officer, she's been attending therapy and working through the family dynamics that led to the crisis. She's taken full responsibility for enabling your father's behavior and for the way she treated you. My secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message containing a single document attachment. I opened it to find a letter written in my mother's familiar handwriting. My dearest Natalie, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I needed to write it anyway. I've had 6 months to think about what happened to our family, and I finally understand that you weren't the one who destroyed us. You were the one who tried to save us from our own choices. Your father's gambling addiction and criminal activities were eating our family alive from the inside, and I chose to enable them rather than face the truth. When you discovered what was happening and tried to protect us through financial controls, I saw you as the problem rather than the solution. I'm not asking for forgiveness, because I know what we did was unforgivable. We threw you away when you refused to participate in funding criminal activity. We blamed you for consequences that your father created. We chose greed and denial over our daughter's welfare. But I want you to know that not a day goes by that I don't regret how we treated you. You were the strongest person in our family, and we punished you for that strength because it reflected our weakness. If you ever decide to reclaim your life, I would be honored to know you again. Not as the mother who raised you, because I failed in that role, but as someone who hopes to earn the privilege of your friendship. With all my love and deepest regret, Mom. I read the letter 3 times, feeling tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed since entering witness protection. The woman who wrote those words sounded like someone I'd never met. Accountable, humble, genuinely remorseful rather than manipulatively emotional. Marshall Torres, if I choose to reclaim my identity, what would that process look like? We'd work with you to transition back gradually. First, we'd restore your legal documents and financial accounts. Then you could reconnect with selected people from your previous life. Eventually, you could return to Millbrook if you wanted, though we'd recommend maintaining some security precautions for the first few months. And if I choose to stay Sarah Chen, then you continue building the life you've created here. Many people in witness protection decide they prefer their new identities to their old ones. There's no judgment either way. I walked to my kitchen window, where I'd hung the small succulent garden that had become my meditation practice over the past 6 months. Each plant represented something I'd learned about myself during this forced isolation. Resilience, the ability to thrive in unexpected conditions, the strength that comes from putting down new roots. Can I think about it? Of course, but Natalie, or Sarah, whichever you prefer, there's something else you should know. Your testimony and the financial evidence you provided didn't just bring down the Carlyle organization. It led to the recovery of over $3 million in stolen wages that were returned to construction workers and their families. Jake Castellanos and his crew got back everything your father stole from them, plus interest and damages. I closed my eyes, remembering the morning when Jake had called about bounced paychecks, worried about feeding his family. The knowledge that those hardworking people had been made whole again mattered more to me than any personal vindication. One more thing, Marshall Torres said. Your grandmother's inheritance money, the $750,000 your parents demanded, it's still sitting in your original bank account, untouched by the federal seizures because it was legally yours and had no connection to criminal activity. Grandma Delilah's money, the inheritance that had started this entire nightmare when I'd refused to hand it over to fund criminal activities. The money my grandmother had saved through decades of honest work was still there, waiting for me to decide who I wanted to be. I'll call you tomorrow with my decision, I said. After hanging up, I sat in my small living room and realized I was facing the same choice I'd confronted in that FBI conference room 6 months ago. Choose between family loyalty and personal integrity. Except this time, the choice was between the safety of anonymity and the courage to reclaim a life I'd earned through standing up for what was right. The question wasn't whether my family deserved forgiveness. The question was whether I deserved the chance to find out what kind of life I could build when it was based on truth instead of lies. 1 year later, I stood in the conference room of Morrison Design Solutions, my renamed and relocated graphic design firm, looking out at the bustling streets of downtown Portland. The decision to reclaim my identity had led me not back to Millbrook, but to a new city where I could blend the lessons of Sarah Chen with the dreams of Natalie Morrison. The business had grown beyond anything I'd imagined possible. Word had spread in the nonprofit sector about the designer, who specialized in helping organizations rebuild their visual identity after financial scandals or leadership crises. Churches recovering from embezzlement, small businesses rebuilding after fraud, community organizations starting fresh after corruption, they all needed someone who understood that sometimes the only way forward was to acknowledge the past and build something completely new. Natalie, your 3 o'clock is here, my assistant Emma called from the outer office. Luna Martinez from the Millbrook Community Foundation. I smiled, adjusting the framed photo on my desk, a picture of my cottage garden in Oregon, where I'd learned that growth was possible even after everything familiar had been torn away. Luna and I had reconnected 6 months ago when she'd reached out through my business website, not knowing I was her old friend until she heard my voice on the phone. "Send her in," I said, standing to greet the woman who'd been my anchor during the worst crisis of my life. Luna entered with the same warm energy I remembered, though she looked more polished now in her role as executive director of a major nonprofit. She'd taken the job after my story, told carefully, with legal guidance, had inspired her to shift from corporate law to charitable work. "Look at you running your own empire," she said, embracing me warmly. "This office is incredible." "It's not an empire, just a really good team," I said, gesturing to the awards on the wall from organizations I'd helped rebrand after crisis situations. "But thank you. I never expected the business to grow like this." "Well, you had some practice dealing with financial scandals," Luna said, with a knowing smile. "Speaking of which, I have an update you might be interested in." She pulled out her tablet and showed me a news article from the Millbrook Herald. Former construction executive Richard Hartwell, released early from federal prison, begins community service with homeless shelter. I stared at the photo of my father, looking older and thinner than I remembered, wearing a volunteer t-shirt while helping serve meals. The caption noted that he'd completed addiction treatment while incarcerated and had dedicated his early release to, quote, "making amends to the community he'd harmed through his criminal activities." "He's been working at the shelter for 2 months, Luna explained. 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. The director says he's one of their most dedicated volunteers. Shows up early, stays late, never complains about any task." "And Mom?" "Vivian finished her probation 6 months ago. She sold the Riverside Heights house and moved to a small apartment downtown. She's been working as a bookkeeper for 3 different nonprofits, donating all her salary to organizations that help families affected by financial crime." I processed this information, trying to reconcile these descriptions with the people who'd kicked me out for refusing to fund criminal activity. "What about Celeste?" Luna's expression grew more serious. "She's serving her sentence at the federal facility in Miami, but Natalie, she's been writing letters." "To whom?" "To the families her insurance fraud affected. The people who had their premiums raised because of her fake claims, the accident victims who faced delays in legitimate settlements. She's been working with a victim advocate program to make personal apologies." Luna showed me another article, this one from a Miami newspaper. "Federal Inmates Restitution Project helps insurance fraud victims." The photo showed Celeste, my spoiled, entitled sister, working in a prison library, helping other inmates write letters to the families they'd wronged. "She asked the victim advocate to contact me," Luna continued. "She wanted me to tell you that she finally understands what you tried to protect her from. She said she's grateful you didn't let her invest that money with Jameson, even though she hated you for it at the time." I walked to my office window, looking down at the street where people hurried past carrying coffee and conversations, living their normal lives without federal agents or criminal threats or family members demanding inheritance money to cover gambling debts. "Do they know where I am?" "Vivian knows you're in Portland running a successful business. She reads every article about your work online, apparently. But she's never asked for contact information or tried to reach out directly." "Why not?" "Because she says she doesn't have the right to ask for anything from you after what they put you through. She's waiting for you to decide if and when you want them back in your life." My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder, 4:30 p.m. video call with Jake Castellanos. Once a month, I spoke with the former Hartwell construction foreman who now ran a workers' rights advocacy nonprofit, funded partially by the recovered wages from my father's criminal enterprise. "I should take this call," I told Luna. "Jake's been helping other construction workers who've been victimized by employer theft." "Of course. But Natalie, before I go, there's something else." She pulled out an envelope addressed in Vivian's handwriting. "Your mother asked me to give this to you, but only if you seemed open to receiving it. No pressure, no expectations. Just a letter from someone who wants you to know how proud she is of what you've built." I stared at the envelope, remembering the last letter I'd received from my mother, the one that had brought me to tears in my Oregon cottage. This one felt different somehow, less desperate and more respectful. "What would you do?" I asked Luna. "I think," she said carefully, "that forgiveness isn't about whether people deserve it. It's about whether you're ready to stop carrying the weight of their mistakes along with your own strength." After Luna left, I sat alone in my office with the unopened letter and the weight of decisions that had defined the past 2 years. My phone rang with Jake's call, and for the next hour I listened to him describe the legislation he was supporting to protect construction workers from wage theft, the advocacy program he'd built, the families who'd been helped by the money recovered from my father's crimes. "None of this would have happened without you speaking up," Jake said near the end of our call. "I know it cost you everything, but it saved a lot of families from losing what little they had." After we hung up, I opened Vivian's letter. "My dear daughter, I won't insult you by asking for forgiveness or making excuses for choices that nearly destroyed everyone I love. Instead, I want to tell you about the woman you've become, in case no one else has. You've built a business that helps people rebuild after betrayal. You've used your experience with financial crime to protect other families from similar devastation. You've turned the worst thing that happened to our family into a force for good in the world. I see the articles about your work, and I recognize the girl who used to bring me flowers she'd picked because she thought they were prettier than the expensive arrangements at charity events. You always saw beauty in simple, honest things. Now you're helping others find that same beauty in starting over. Your father and I destroyed the family you deserve to have, but watching you build a life based on truth and justice instead of lies and convenience has been the only source of pride in my life for the past 2 years. I don't expect reconciliation or relationship. I just wanted you to know that the daughter we failed to protect has become the woman we should have raised you to be all along. With endless love and respect, Mom." I folded the letter and looked out at the Portland skyline, where the setting sun was painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. My secure phone, the one I'd kept even after leaving witness protection, sat silent on my desk. No more threatening calls, no more federal agents, no more fear that criminals would come looking for the woman who'd exposed their money laundering operation. For the first time in 2 years, I felt truly free. Free from the weight of family obligations that had been built on manipulation rather than love. Free from the need to protect people who'd chosen criminal activity over their daughter's welfare. Free from the anger that had sustained me through federal investigations and witness protection, and starting over with nothing but my grandmother's inheritance and the clothes I could pack in an hour. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Luna. "Thank you for bringing the letter. Tell Mom I got it, and that I'm proud of the work she's doing too." Then I sent another message, this one to Marshall Torres. "The threats are over, my business is thriving, and I think I'm ready to stop being afraid of my own family. If they want to rebuild a relationship based on truth instead of manipulation, I'm willing to try." As I locked up my office and headed home to my Portland apartment, not as large as my Oregon cottage, but in a building where I knew my neighbors' names and felt part of a community, I realized that the story that had begun with my parents demanding my inheritance had ended with something more valuable than money. It had ended with me discovering who I was when I stopped trying to be who everyone else needed me to be. The girl who'd been kicked out on her 28th birthday for refusing to fund criminal activity had become a woman who helped others rebuild after betrayal. The daughter who'd chosen justice over family loyalty had created a business that protected families from financial predators. The witness who'd testified against her own father had used that experience to build legislation that protected workers from wage theft. Some stories end with getting back what you lost. Others end with discovering that what you lost was never worth keeping in the first place. Mine ended with the realization that the best inheritance my grandmother had left me wasn't the $750,000 she'd saved through decades of honest work. It was the example she'd set of building a life based on integrity, even when that choice came with a price. 2 years after my parents tried to force me to fund their criminal activities, I was living a life they'd made possible, not through their love, but through their betrayal. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I was grateful for every decision that had led me here. What would you do if your family's betrayal became the foundation for your greatest success? Have you ever discovered that losing everything was actually the beginning of finding yourself? Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.